The gavel was already raised. The air in courtroom 4B was thick enough to choke on heavy, with the scent of expensive cologne and desperate silence. Hayden Perry, the tech billionaire who thought he owned the world, sat with a smirk that could cut glass, his hand hovering over the gold-plated pen. He wasn't just divorcing his wife, he was erasing her. But just as Judge Henderson opened his mouth to finalize the settlement that would leave Lydia Perry homeless, a single sound stopped the clock. The sharp zip of a leather portfolio. Lydia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply slid a single yellowed document across the mahogany table. A document with a signature Hayden had long forgotten, but one that was about to cost him everything. The Honorable Judge Harold P. Henderson adjusted his spectacles, the fluorescent lights of the Superior Court reflecting off the thick lenses. He looked tired. It was 4:15 p.m. on a Friday, and the Perry divorce had been dragging on for 6 grueling months. To the outside world, Hayden Perry was a visionary, the CEO of Perry Systems, a man who had revolutionized cloud computing and turned a garage startup into a 9-figure empire. But inside these wood-paneled walls, he was just another wealthy man, trying to discard a wife who had aged out of his lifestyle. Hayden sat at the plaintiff's table looking every inch the master of the universe. He wore a bespoke navy suit that cost more than most people's cars. His posture relaxed, bordering on bored. Next to him sat Arthur Dent, a divorce attorney known in the city as the Great White Shark. Dent was currently checking his watch, clearly eager to get to his weekend tea time. On the other side of the aisle, the atmosphere was starkly different. Lydia Perry sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple grey dress, outdated by at least 3 seasons. Her hair, once a vibrant chestnut, was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun. She looked small, defeated. Next to her was Sarah Jenkins, a public defender who had taken the case pro bono when Hayden froze all of Lydia's accounts. Sarah looked out of her depth-shuffling papers with nervous energy. "Mr. Dent." Judge Henderson sighed, rubbing his temples. "We have been over the assets 3 times. Your client asserts that Mrs. Perry contributed nothing to the formation or success of Perry Systems, and per the state statutes regarding equitable distribution, is entitled only to what she brought into the marriage. Is that still your position?" Arthur Dent stood up, buttoning his jacket, with a smooth, practiced motion. "It is your honor. The facts are indisputable. When Mr. Perry founded the company in 2008, Lydia was working as a junior librarian. Her income was negligible. She did not invest capital. She did not write code. She managed the household, a task, I might add, that was largely outsourced to a staff of 3 once the money started coming in. We are offering a generous lump sum of $50,000 to help her get settled. Frankly, Your Honor, it's charity." A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. $50,000. It was an insult. It wouldn't even cover rent in the city for a year. Hayden leaned back, catching Lydia's eye. He winked. It was a cold, predatory gesture. He mouthed one word. "Done." Lydia didn't flinch. She just stared at the grain of the wood on the table, her face unreadable. 50,000. Judge Henderson repeated, his voice flat. "For a marriage of 15 years. It's a short-term marriage in the grand scheme of assets, Your Honor," Dent argued smoothly, "and considering Mrs. Perry's indiscretions, we feel it is more than fair." This was the narrative they had spun. They had painted Lydia as a leech, a woman who sat on the couch eating bonbons, while Hayden toiled away to build the future. They claimed she was emotionally unstable, distant, and perhaps even unfaithful, Though they had no proof of the latter, the accusation alone was enough to tarnish her in the court of public opinion. "Mrs. Jenkins," the judge turned to Lydia's lawyer, "do you have a counter-proposal, or are we ready to conclude this?" Sarah Jenkins stood up, her voice trembling slightly. "Your Honor, my client. She supported Mr. Perry for 5 years before the company made a dime. She paid the rent. She bought the groceries. She—" "Irrelevant," Dent cut, in not even looking at her. "Paying for groceries in 2008 does not entitle one to half of $1 billion conglomerate in 2024. The law is clear on premarital versus marital assets, and since the company was incorporated before the wedding ceremony, strictly speaking, it is separate property." Hayden tapped his fingers on the table. Tap, tap, tap. He was winning. He always won. He looked over his shoulder at the back of the courtroom. Sitting in the back row, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf that did little to hide her identity, was Sasha. Sasha was 24, an influencer with perfect teeth and zero understanding of how Hayden made his money, only that he had it. She blew him a subtle kiss. Hayden turned back to the judge. He was ready to start his new life. A life without the anchor of a middle-aged librarian dragging him down. "Judge," Hayden spoke up, his voice rich and baritone, designed to command boardrooms. "I just want to be fair, but I also want to be free. I built this company from nothing. Lydia, she's a good woman, but she doesn't understand business. She doesn't understand the pressure. I'm trying to protect the company's but also whole future." "By leaving your wife destitute?" Judge Henderson asked sharply. "She's capable of working." Hayden shrugged. "The library is always hiring." Lydia's head snapped up. For the first time all day, there was fire in her eyes. The library comment. It wasn't just an insult. It was a specific, targeted dagger. He knew how much she had loved that job, and he knew he was the one who forced her to quit it 10 years ago, because a CEO's wife shouldn't be shelving books. Sarah Jenkins leaned down to whisper to Lydia. "Lydia, we might have to take the 50,000. The judge is looking at the clock. Dent has buried us in paperwork. We don't have the resources to fight a forensic audit." Lydia looked at Sarah. Then she looked at Hayden, who was checking his cuticles. She looked at the judge, who was reaching for his stamp. "No," Lydia whispered. "What?" Sarah blinked. "No," Lydia said louder this time. She stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh sound that silenced the room. "Mrs. Perry," Judge Henderson peered over his glasses. "Speak through your attorney, please." "My attorney doesn't know everything, Your Honor," Lydia said, her voice clear and surprisingly steady. "Because until this morning I wasn't sure if I was going to use it." Hayden rolled his eyes. "Oh God, here come the hysterics. Can we wrap this up?" "Sit down, Mrs. Perry," Dent barked. Lydia ignored them. She reached into her battered tote bag, a bag she had owned since before the billions, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It wasn't crisp and new like the documents Dent had piled on the table. It was old. The corners were bent. There was a coffee stain on the bottom edge. "Mr. Perry says he wants to follow the law," Lydia said, walking around the table toward the bench. The bailiff stepped forward to stop her, but the judge held up a hand. "He says he wants to stick to the agreements we made." "I have no idea what that is." Hayden scoffed, though his eyes narrowed slightly. He scanned his memory. Had he signed something, a birthday card? A letter? Nothing that would hold up in court. He had an army of lawyers who reviewed every scrap of paper he touched. "It's a contract," Lydia said, placing the envelope on the judge's bench. "Dated June 14th, 2009. 1 year into our marriage, 6 months before Perry Systems went public. Dent laughed. A post-nup. If Mr. Perry didn't file it with us, it doesn't exist. And even if it does, if he didn't have legal representation at the time of signing, it's void. Nice try, honey. Lydia turned to look directly at Hayden. You didn't have representation, Hayden, because you didn't want them to know what you did. Hayden's face went a shade paler. June 2009. The summer of the breach. What is this? Judge Henderson asked, opening the clasp. He slid out the document. It was handwritten on legal pad paper, but it was notarized. There were 3 stamps on it. It's an agreement regarding the ownership of the intellectual property known as the algorithm, Lydia said, specifically the source code that Perry Systems is built on. This is ridiculous. Hayden stood up his chair, flying back. That code is mine. I wrote it in the garage. You wrote the interface, Hayden, Lydia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous chill. You couldn't solve the data compression issue. You were stuck for 4 months. You were going to lose the venture capital funding. Remember? The courtroom was dead silent. Even Sasha in the back row had lowered her sunglasses. I fixed it, Hayden stammered. I stayed up 3 nights in a row and fixed it. No, Lydia said. You passed out drunk on the sofa. I fixed it. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Liar, Hayden shouted. She's a librarian. She doesn't know C++. She doesn't know Python. I have a double major in mathematics and information systems from MIT. Hayden, Lydia said quietly. A degree I never used because you wanted a traditional wife. A degree you conveniently forgot to mention to your lawyers. Judge Henderson was reading the document. His eyebrows had climbed so high they were practically touching his hairline. He looked up at Hayden, then down at the paper, then back at Hayden. Mr. Dent, the judge said, his voice unusually soft. You might want to see this. Dent scrambled to the bench. He snatched the paper. As he read, the blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. It says, Dent choked. It says that in exchange for Mrs. Perry providing the solution to the compression bottleneck, Hayden Perry grants her 51% of all future controlling interest in any entity utilizing said code. And, Lydia added, there's a clause at the bottom. Paragraph 4. Dent looked down. His hands were shaking. The fidelity clause. Read it, Lydia commanded. It was the first time she had given an order in 15 years. Dent swallowed hard. In the event that Hayden Perry seeks to dissolve the marriage or is found to be engaging in extramarital affairs, the remaining 49% of his shares shall immediately revert to Lydia Perry as a penalty for breach of trust. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Hayden dropped back into his chair. He looked like he had been shot. That's not legal, Hayden whispered. It can't be legal. It's notarized, Judge Henderson said, looking at the stamp. By Justice Samuel Alito. How on earth did you get a Supreme Court justice to notarize a handwritten contract? He wasn't a justice then, Lydia said. He was an old friend of my father's. We were at a barbecue. Hayden was desperate. He begged me to fix the code. He said he'd give me anything. I told him I didn't want money. I just wanted security. I wanted to know he wouldn't use my work to get rich and then dump me for a younger model. She glanced at Sasha. Looks like I was right to worry. The chaos that followed Lydia's revelation was unlike anything the Superior Court had seen in a decade. Arthur Dent, usually the most composed man in the room, was frantically texting his firm's senior partners. Hayden sat frozen, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring at the yellowed paper that had just vaporized his net worth. Judge Henderson banged his gavel not to silence the room, but to wake Hayden up. "Mr. Dent, I'm going to assume you need a recess to discuss this development with your client." "Recess," Dent squeaked. "Your Honor, I move for a dismissal." "This document is a forgery. It has to be." "My client would never sign away his company." "It's not a forgery, Arthur," Hayden whispered. His voice was hollow. Dent whipped around. "Shut up. Don't speak." "I remember," Hayden said, looking at Lydia with a mixture of horror and awe. "It was the night of the barbecue. I was so stressed. The investors were pulling out the next morning if I didn't have the prototype working. I couldn't figure out the compression. The servers kept crashing. I was crying. I was actually crying in the kitchen." Lydia nodded slowly. "You were. You told me you were a failure. You told me you were going to lose the house. So I took your laptop. I sat at the kitchen island for 6 hours. I rewrote the kernel. And Hayden rubbed his face, the memory flooding back through the fog of arrogance he had built up over the years. "I was so happy. When you showed me it worked, I told you I'd give you the moon. You grabbed a legal pad and said, 'I don't want the moon. I just want this.' You signed it," Lydia said. "And then you toasted with a beer and said, 'It doesn't matter, Lyd. We're partners forever anyway. What's mine is yours.' Do you remember saying that?" Hayden didn't answer. The irony was suffocating him. "This changes the jurisdiction," Judge Henderson said, leaning forward. "This is no longer a simple divorce case. This is a corporate ownership dispute involving billions of dollars. However," the judge paused, a glimmer of steel in his eyes, "the infidelity clause is a matter of contract law within the marriage. Mr. Dent, you opened this hearing by stating the facts were indisputable. Is it your position that Mr. Perry has not been unfaithful?" Dent opened his mouth, but before he could lie, the courtroom doors swung open with a bang. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a cheap trench coat walked in. He wasn't a lawyer. He looked like a private investigator who had spent too many nights in a surveillance van. He walked straight up to Sarah Jenkins and handed her a USB drive. "Sorry I'm late," the man grunted. "Traffic on the I-95. Sarah Jenkins, who had been watching the scene unfold with stunned delight, plugged the drive into her laptop and connected it to the courtroom's projector system. "Your Honor," Sarah said, finding her voice, "if we are debating the validity of the fidelity clause, I believe this evidence is relevant." The screen behind the judge flickered to life. It wasn't grainy, blurry footage. It was 4K high-definition video. It showed Hayden Perry on a yacht. The date stamp was from 3 weeks ago. He was holding a champagne bottle in one hand and Sasha Miller in the other. They were clearly not discussing business strategies. "Turn it off," Hayden roared, jumping up. "This is an invasion of privacy." "It was filmed in a public harbor," Sarah said calmly. "No expectation of privacy on the deck of a yacht, Mr. Perry." The video continued. In the audio crisp and clear over the courtroom speakers, Hayden's voice could be heard. "Don't worry about the old hag, babe. My lawyers are going to crush her. She'll be lucky if she walks away with the Toyota. Once the divorce is signed, we're taking the jet to the Maldives. I'm buying you that island." The old hag. Lydia watched the screen, her expression unchanging. She had known. Of course she had known. But hearing it, hearing the man she had saved, the man she had loved, speak about her with such visceral contempt, it severed the last thread of emotional attachment she had. In the back row, Sasha Miller suddenly stood up. She wasn't looking at Hayden with love anymore. She was looking at the screen, then at Lydia, and doing the math. If Lydia owned 100% of the company, Hayden was broke. Sasha grabbed her handbag. She didn't look at Hayden. She turned and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking a fast retreat. The door slammed shut behind her. Hayden watched her go. He reached out a hand as if to stop her, but his hand fell limp. He was alone. "Well," Judge Henderson said, looking at the paused image of Hayden on the screen. "That seems definitive." "Your Honor," Dent stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. We request a continuance. We need to authenticate the handwriting on the contract. We need to. You can have a continuance for the formalities," the judge said. "But the court is inclined to enforce the notarized document absent compelling evidence of fraud. And frankly, Mr. Dent, your client, just admitted to signing it on the record." Hayden sank into his chair. He looked at Lydia. "Lydia, please. We can work this out. You don't know how to run a company. The board will eat you alive. The stock will tank if they find out." Lydia finally sat down. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. She saw the wrinkles he tried to hide with Botox. She saw the fear behind the arrogance. "I don't need to run it, Hayden," she said softly. "I just need to own it. I can hire people to run it. People who actually know how to code." "You can't do this," Hayden hissed. "I am Perry Systems." "Not anymore," she said. "Now you're just the ex-husband of the owner." The judge cleared his throat. "We will reconvene on Monday at 9:00 a.m. to finalize the asset transfer protocols. Mr. Perry, I suggest you use the weekend to pack your things from the marital residence. Mrs. Perry, or should I say Ms. Bennett, the court grants you temporary exclusive possession of the estate pending the final ruling." "Thank you, Your Honor," Lydia said. As the bailiff called, "All rise," Hayden didn't move. He sat there staring at the empty table where his billions used to be. But the drama wasn't over. As Lydia packed her bag, Arthur Dent leaned over to Hayden. "We're not dead yet. There's a loophole. There's always a loophole. The contract says intellectual property known as the algorithm. We just have to prove that the current company doesn't run on that algorithm anymore. We have to prove you rewrote it." Hayden's eyes lit up, a flicker of hope. I did update it. In 2015. We migrated to a new architecture. Then the contract only applies to the old code. Dent whispered, a shark smelling blood in the water again. "She owns a piece of history. You still own the company. We just need to prove the separation." Lydia was walking toward the exit. She paused at the door, sensing the shift in the room. She looked back at Hayden and Dent, who were now huddled together plotting. She smiled. It was a sad smile. Because she knew something they didn't. She knew exactly what was in the 2015 update. Because she had written that one, too. Under a pseudonym. The weekend that followed the courtroom bombshell was a study in contrasts. While Lydia Perry sat in the quiet, echoing expanse of the mansion she had been exiled from, sipping tea and watching the movers pack Hayden's collection of rare electric guitars, Hayden was at the Perry Systems headquarters, sweating through his third shirt of the day. It was 2:00 a.m. on Sunday. The skyscraper was empty, save for the cleaning crew and the security guards who were paid enough to look the other way. Hayden was in the server room, a subterranean fortress chilled to a constant 60 degrees. Next to him was Kevin O'Malley, the company's chief technology officer. Kevin looked terrified. "I need you to scrub the headers," Hayden demanded, his voice echoing off the racks of blinking servers. "The 2015 update, the Titan architecture. I want every line of code that predates 2016 erased or rewritten." Kevin adjusted his glasses, his hands shaking as he typed on the terminal. "Hayden, you don't understand. The Titan update isn't just a patch, it's the foundation. If I delete the core kernel, the entire cloud collapses. Amazon, Google, the government contracts. Everything goes dark. We're talking about a global outage." "I don't care about the outage." Hayden slammed his fist against a server rack. "I care about ownership. Dent says if we can prove the code is new, the contract is void. Who wrote the 2015 patch, Kevin?" "It was me, right? I supervised the team. Put my name on the commit logs." Kevin stopped typing. He turned his swivel chair slowly to face his boss. The blue light from the monitors washed out his face, making him look like a ghost. "Hayden, you didn't write Titan," Kevin said softly. "You were in rehab in Malibu in 2015. Remember? You told the press it was a spiritual retreat." Hayden froze. He had hoped everyone had forgotten that. "So I directed it remotely?" "No." Kevin shook his head. "We received the code packages via an encrypted server. We thought you hired a contractor, a ghostwriter. The code was flawless, better than anything our team could produce. The developer signed it with a handle." "What handle?" Hayden demanded. "L.B. Lovelace," Kevin said. Hayden stared at him. The air in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. L.B. Lydia Bennett, her maiden name. And Lovelace, as in Ada Lovelace, the first computer programmer in history. It was a joke, a private joke she had played on him right under his nose. "She wrote it," Hayden whispered, the horror dawning on him. "She wrote the update while I was drying out, and she let me take the credit to keep the stock price up." "If she has the cryptographic key for that handle," Kevin said, "she can prove authorship in seconds. And if she proves she wrote the modern architecture, she doesn't just own 51% based on the old contract. She owns the intellectual property rights to the entire platform." Hayden leaned against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He wasn't just fighting a divorce settlement anymore. He was fighting a creator who could remote detonate his entire life. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Lydia was in Hayden's home office. She wasn't gloating. She was working. She had found Hayden's private safe behind a painting of himself naturally. She didn't have the combination, but she didn't need it. She knew Hayden. He was arrogant, but he was lazy. She tried the date of the company's IPO. Click. The light turned green. Inside, she didn't find cash. She found leverage. There were folders on the board members, blackmail material, photos of Senator Davies at a party he shouldn't have been at, financial records showing the CFO Carter Banks was skimming off the top of the employee pension fund. Hayden had built his empire on fear and secrets. He kept everyone in line by holding a knife to their throats. Lydia sat back in the leather chair that was too big for her. She thumbed through the file on Carter Banks. "You wanted a war, Hayden," she murmured to the empty room. "But you forgot that the person who builds the castle knows exactly where the structural weaknesses are." She took out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Hello," a groggy voice answered. "Lydia, it's 3 a.m. "Wake up Sarah," Lydia said to her lawyer. "I need you to draft some subpoenas, and I need you to hire a forensic accountant. I found the bodies. Now we just need to dig the graves. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a hurricane. The news of the divorce hearing had leaked, likely thanks to Sasha Miller, who had sold her story to TMZ over the weekend for a quick payout. The headline read, "Billionaire's ex-wife claims she built the empire." The stock price of Perry Systems had opened down 12%. The sharks were circling. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. The boardroom was a glass-walled cage on the 50th floor overlooking the city skyline. 12 men and 1 woman sat around the oval table. They looked nervous. Hayden stormed in at 9:01 a.m. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his suit was wrinkled, and he reeked of coffee and desperation. Arthur Dent trailed behind him, looking equally haggard. "It's under control," Hayden announced before he even sat down. "The document is a forgery. We're filing a motion to dismiss. The stock will rebound by noon." "That's not what the market thinks, Hayden," said Carter Banks, the CFO. He was a slick man with greased back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Investors are panicked. They're saying if Lydia Perry triggers the ownership clause, we're looking at a hostile takeover from within." "She's a librarian," Hayden shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "She doesn't know how to run a tech company. She's bluffing." The double doors at the end of the room opened. Lydia Perry walked in. She wasn't wearing the grey, outdated dress from court. She was wearing a sharp, tailored white suit. Her hair was down, blown out in soft waves. She didn't look like a scorned wife. She looked like a CEO. Sarah Jenkins walked beside her, carrying a laptop. "I'm not bluffing, Hayden," Lydia said, her voice projecting effortlessly across the room. "You can't be in here," Dent yelped. "This is a closed session for board members only." "I am the majority shareholder," Lydia said, calmly pulling out the chair at the head of the table opposite Hayden. "Or I will be as soon as Judge Henderson stamps the order this afternoon. I'm here to save the company you're currently driving off a cliff." "Security!" Hayden yelled. "Get her out of here!" 2 guards stepped forward, but stopped when Lydia held up a hand. "Gentlemen," Lydia said to the guards, "if you touch me, you're assaulting the owner of this building. Furthermore, Mr. Perry's authorization to issue orders is currently suspended." She turned to the board. "I know what Hayden has told you. He told you I'm a leech. He told you I'm incapable. But here is the reality." Sarah Jenkins connected the laptop to the boardroom screen. A stream of complex code appeared, cascading lines of green text on a black background. "This is the source code for the Titan architecture," Lydia said. "The backbone of your entire operation. Hayden claims he wrote it in 2015. But if you look at the metadata, you'll see the author signature, L.B. Lovelace." "A contractor," Hayden spat. "We hired a contractor." "Lydia Bennett," she said, tapping her chest. "Lovelace, my cryptographic key is on this USB drive. I can decrypt the kernel right now. Can you, Hayden?" Hayden went silent. The board members exchanged glances. They were money men, not coders, but they understood power. And right now the power was shifting. "So what?" Carter Banks sneered. He leaned back, crossing his arms. He was the one person Lydia was worried about. He was Hayden's attack dog. "Let's say you wrote some code 10 years ago. That doesn't qualify you to lead a Fortune 500 company. We need stability. Hayden is the face of the brand." The face of the brand was caught on a yacht calling his wife a hag and bragging about hiding assets, Lydia countered. "That video has 3 million views. The brand is toxic, Carter, and so are you." Carter blinked. "Excuse me." Lydia slid a manila folder across the long table. It spun perfectly, stopping right in front of Carter. "The pension fund," Lydia said simply. Carter's face went white. "I found the ledgers in Hayden's safe," Lydia continued, addressing the rest of the board. "Carter has been funneling 3% of the employee retirement fund into a shell company in the Caymans. Hayden knew about it. He used it to keep Carter loyal." The room erupted. 3 board members stood up, shouting. Hayden looked at Carter, then at Lydia, his mouth hanging open. He had forgotten the safe. He had been so focused on the code, he forgot the physical evidence of his corruption. "This is a lie," Carter screamed, standing up. "She's fabricating evidence." "The forensic audit I ordered this morning says otherwise," Lydia said coolly. "The FBI is on their way to the Cayman Bank as we speak." You witch," Hayden hissed. "I'm not a witch, Hayden," Lydia said, standing up and leaning over the table, her eyes locking with his. "I'm the woman who fixed your mistakes for 15 years. I'm just done doing it from the shadows." She looked around the room. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the CEO and the CFO, effective immediately." The silence was heavy. The board members looked at Hayden, who was trembling with rage. They looked at Carter, who was sweating. And then they looked at Lydia, who stood tall, radiating the kind of competence they hadn't seen in this room in years. "I second the motion," said a voice. It was William Sharp, the oldest member of the board, a man Hayden had always ignored. "All in favor?" Lydia asked. Hands went up, one by one, until only Hayden and Carter were left with their hands down. "You can't do this!" Hayden screamed, grabbing his water glass and hurling it at the wall. It shattered, showering the carpet in shards. "I built this, me!" "Escort Mr. Perry and Mr. Banks from the building," Lydia said to the security guards. This time the guards didn't hesitate. They moved toward Hayden, but Hayden wasn't done. As the guard reached for his arm, Hayden shook him off. He straightened his jacket, a manic glint in his eye. "You think you've won?" Hayden laughed. It was a jagged, unstable sound. "You think you can just walk in here and take my life? You forgot one thing, Lydia." "And what is that?" "You signed the NDA." Hayden smiled. "The non-disclosure agreement. When you fixed the code in 2009, you signed a standard contractor NDA to protect the company's secrets. It forbids you from disclosing proprietary information to third parties." "So," Lydia frowned, "you just showed the source code to Sarah Jenkins," Hayden pointed at the lawyer, "and you showed the pension files to the board before they were authorized. That's a breach of contract, a federal crime. Theft of trade secrets." He pulled out his phone. "I already called the police. They're in the lobby." The victory in the boardroom lasted exactly 4 minutes. The elevator doors pinged, and 4 uniformed police officers, accompanied by 2 detectives in suits, stepped onto the executive floor. Carter Banks, who had been on the verge of vomiting, suddenly straightened up. This was their contingency plan. The poison pill. "Lydia Perry?" the lead detective asked. He was a grim-faced man named Detective Miller. "That's me," Lydia said, her heart skipping a beat. "You are under arrest for corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act," Detective Miller said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "This is insane." Sarah Jenkins stepped in front of Lydia. "She owns the company. You can't steal from yourself." "Currently, the company is owned by Perry Systems, Inc., Arthur Dent interjected, stepping out from behind Hayden. His confidence was back. "Mrs. Perry is merely a claimant in a divorce proceeding. Until the assets are transferred, she is an unauthorized civilian who just hacked into our mainframe and accessed classified financial documents." She didn't hack anything, Sarah argued. She opened a safe. She bypassed digital security locks, Hayden lied smoothly. And she broadcasted proprietary code on that screen. That code is worth billions. She just compromised our trade secrets. The detective looked at Lydia. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back. Lydia looked at Hayden. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man who knew how to game the system. He knew he couldn't win on the facts, so he was using procedure to crush her. He would tie her up in criminal court for years. By the time she got out, the company would be gutted. The money moved, and he would be in a non-extradition country. "It's okay, Sarah," Lydia said, holding out her wrists. The cold steel of the cuffs clicked shut. The sound was deafening in the silent boardroom. "We'll have you out in an hour," Sarah promised, though she looked pale. "This is a malicious prosecution." "Take her away." Hayden waved his hand dismissively. "And make sure the press gets a good photo of the CEO in cuffs." As the police led Lydia out, she didn't look down. She kept her head high. She walked past the board members who had just voted for her. They looked confused, unsure of which alpha dog to follow now. Hayden turned to the board. "Sorry about that, gentlemen. My ex-wife is unwell. Mental instability. I'll handle the cleanup. Carter and I will get back to work." He thought he had won. He thought he had cut the head off the snake. But Lydia wasn't the snake. She was the venom. As she was led into the elevator, Lydia caught the eye of William Sharp, the board member who had seconded her motion. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. William Sharp checked his watch. He waited until the elevator doors closed. Then he looked at Hayden Perry. "Hayden," William said, his voice gravelly. "There is one problem with your theory." "What's that, Bill?" Hayden asked, pouring himself a fresh glass of water, his hands shaking slightly. "You said she hacked the mainframe to get the code," William said. "But the system logs show that the code was accessed using the master admin credentials." "So she stole my password?" Hayden shrugged. "No," William said. "The master admin account hasn't been used by you in 5 years. We all know you lost the password. That account belongs to the system architect." William tapped the table. "If Lydia logged in as the architect, she didn't steal the secrets. She is the secret." "It doesn't matter," Hayden snapped. "She's in jail. By the time she gets bail, I'll have fired the board and restructured the bylaws." Hayden pulled out his phone to call his broker. "Sell," he barked into the phone. "Sell everything in the secondary accounts. Move the liquid cash to the crypto wallets." "You can't do that," Carter Banks whispered. "The FBI is watching." "The FBI is slow," Hayden hissed. "I'm fast." Lydia sat in the back of the police cruiser, watching the city pass by through the wire mesh. It was humiliating. It was terrifying. But as they turned the corner toward the precinct, she saw a news van, then another, then a crowd. Sasha Miller's interview had gone viral, but not the way Hayden intended. The internet sleuths had dug up everything. They found the old forum posts from 2009, where L.B. Lovelace was helping other coders fix Perry Systems bugs while Hayden was partying. They found Lydia's college transcripts. The narrative wasn't crazy ex-wife. The narrative was genius woman robbed by tech bro. When Lydia stepped out of the police car, the flashes of the cameras were blinding, but they weren't shouting insults. "Lydia, did you write the code? Lydia, is it true he fired you for being a librarian? Lydia, we believe you." Lydia stopped. The detective tugged on her arm, but she planted her feet. She looked directly into the camera of a local news station. "Hayden Perry just had me arrested for stealing my own creation," she said, her voice clear and ringing. "He thinks this is the end, but tell him to check his email, specifically the automated dead man switch I set up in the system." "What dead man switch?" the reporter yelled. "If I don't log in every 24 hours, Lydia smiled, a dangerous, razor-sharp smile. "The Titan protocol reverts to its factory settings, which means in exactly—" She checked the dashboard clock of the police car. 45 minutes, Perry Systems ceases to exist. The detective shoved her toward the station doors. "Keep moving." But the message was sent. Back in the boardroom, Hayden's phone buzzed, then Carter's, then every phone in the room. System alert. Critical failure imminent. Authorization revoked. Initiating data wipe in 44, 59. Hayden stared at the screen. The color drained from his face until he looked like a wax figure. He didn't need a lawyer anymore. He needed a hacker. And the only hacker who could stop it was sitting in a holding cell wearing handcuffs he had put on her. The drive from the Perry Systems tower to the 4th precinct usually took 20 minutes. Hayden Perry made it in 9. He was in the back of his Maybach, screaming at his driver to run red lights. On his lap, his laptop was open, displaying the countdown that was currently being broadcast on every screen in his company's headquarters. Time remaining: 28. 15. "Faster," Hayden shrieked, slamming his hand against the leather partition. "If we hit traffic, I will fire you and sue your entire family." Next to him, Arthur Dent was hyperventilating into a paper bag. The lawyer had realized that if the company dissolved his firm's retainer, worth $3 million a year, dissolved with it. "We need a judge," Dent wheezed. "We need an emergency injunction to stop the code execution." "There is no judge who can type code," Hayden yelled. "The server is encrypted. She's the only one with the key. We have to get her to type it in." They screeched to a halt in front of the precinct. Hayden didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He scrambled out, tripping over the curb, his expensive Italian suit tearing at the knee. He didn't care. He burst into the station lobby like a madman. "I need to see Lydia Perry," he shouted at the desk sergeant. "Right now." The sergeant, a woman who looked like she had absolutely no patience for billionaires in torn suits, didn't even look up from her paperwork. "She's being processed. You can wait." "I can't wait." Hayden slammed his hand on the desk. "Do you know who I am?" "I am Hayden Perry. And in 26 minutes, the global cloud infrastructure is going to crash. Hospitals will go offline. Banks will freeze. You have to let me see her." The sergeant looked at the clock, then at Hayden. "Sounds like a you problem, sir. Unless you're her attorney, you have no visitation rights." Hayden turned to Arthur Dent. You represent her, tell them." I represent you," Dent stammered. "Conflict of interest." Hayden grabbed Dent by the lapels. "Fire yourself, then rehire yourself as her lawyer. Do it." It was a farce, a complete collapse of dignity, but the clock was ticking. 22:00. Suddenly, the heavy metal door to the holding area buzzed open. Sarah Jenkins walked out, looking calm, holding her briefcase. "Sarah." Hayden lunged at her. "Sarah, you have to stop this. The dead man switch. It's real." "I know," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Lydia told me. It's a fail-safe she built in case she was ever incapacitated. Or, falsely arrested by a vindictive ex-husband." "Get me in there," Hayden begged. Tears were actually streaming down his face now. "I'll drop the charges. I'll give her the 50,000. I'll give her the house." Sarah laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Hayden, you are way past bargaining with houses. You want to save your company. You're going to have to do a lot better than that." "Anything," Hayden screamed. "I'll give her half, 50-50 split. Just let me in." Sarah pulled a document from her briefcase. It was already drafted. "Sign this," she said. Hayden looked at it. "Stipulation of settlement." "What does it say?" Hayden asked, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the paper. "It says you admit to perjury." Sarah listed off. "It says you admit to filing a false police report. It says you admit that Lydia Perry is the sole creator of the Titan architecture. And," she flipped the page, "it transfers 100% of your voting shares to Lydia Perry immediately." 100%. Hayden choked. "That leaves me with nothing. I'll be destitute." "No," Sarah corrected. "You'll still have your 49% of the monetary value. You'll be rich, but you won't be in charge. You won't be on the board. You won't even have a key card to the building. You will be a solent partner. Patent. Forever. Kind remaining." 30. Hayden looked at the clock on the wall. He looked at Arthur Dent, who just shrugged helplessly. "If I sign this, she stops the countdown." "If you sign this, I take you to her," Sarah said, "and you ask her nicely." Hayden snatched the pen. He signed his name so hard the tip ripped through the paper. "Done now. Take me to her." Sarah nodded to the sergeant. "He's with me. Legal counsel." The sergeant buzzed them in. They walked down the grim grey hallway. The air smelled of bleach and despair. At the end of the hall in interrogation room B, Lydia Perry sat at a metal table. Her hands were still cuffed. She was staring at the wall, humming a soft tune. Hayden burst in, breathless. "Lydia, stop it! Stop the code!" Lydia turned slowly. She looked at Hayden, then at Sarah. She saw the signed pauper in Sarah's hand. "Did he sign it?" Lydia asked. "He did," Sarah said. "Good," Lydia said. She looked at Hayden. "Unlock me." "I don't have the keys," Hayden yelled. "Officer, unlock her." The guard grumbled but stepped forward, unlocking the cuffs. Lydia rubbed her wrists. She took her time. "Lydia, please." Hayden checked his phone. 00800. 8 minutes. The reboot takes 5. We have 3 minutes to enter the key. Lydia stood up. She smoothed her white suit. "I need a laptop." Hayden shoved his open laptop onto the table. "Here, do it." Lydia sat down. She placed her fingers on the keys, then she stopped. "One more thing," she said. Hayden looked like he was going to have a stroke. "What? What else could you possibly want?" "You have the company. You have my dignity." "What?" "I want you to say it," Lydia said softly. "Say what?" "Say that I was the smart one," Lydia said, her eyes boring into his. "Say that without me, you would still be in a garage trying to figure out why your code wouldn't compile. I want you to admit in front of Sarah and the camera in the corner that you are a fraud and I am the genius." Hayden's jaw tightened. His ego was the only thing he had left. To say it out loud, it was death. 0004. 00. Hayden gritted his teeth. "I can't." "Okay," Lydia stood up. "Let it burn." "No." Hayden grabbed her arm. She flinched and he pulled back instantly. Okay, I'm a fraud. And you." Hayden sobbed a dry, heaving sound. "You are the genius. You fixed it. You built it. It's always been you." Lydia watched him for a second. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just nodded, accepting the truth. She sat down. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She typed in a command string that was 64 characters long. It was complex, elegant, and memorized perfectly. Enter. On the screen, the red countdown froze at 0001:42. The text turned green. System restored. Titan protocol secure. Hayden collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. It was over. The company was saved. But it wasn't his company anymore. 2 weeks later, the courtroom looked very different. There was no tension. There were no outbursts. Judge Henderson sat on the bench looking over the final decree with a sense of profound relief that this case was finally leaving his docket. Lydia sat at the plaintiff's table. She was alone this time. Sarah Jenkins was now the general counsel of Perry Systems and was busy firing the entire HR department, so Lydia had come by herself. She didn't need protection anymore. Hayden wasn't there. He had been granted permission to skip the hearing. He was currently in Switzerland, resting. Or hiding. The FBI investigation into the pension fund was still ongoing, and while Lydia had agreed not to press charges for the false arrest, she hadn't promised to protect him from the feds regarding Carter Banks's embezzlement. Arthur Dent stood on the defense side, looking defeated. "Your Honor," Dent said, his voice lacking its usual boom, "we accept the terms as filed." "Very well," Judge Henderson said. He stamped the document. Clack, thud. "The marriage is dissolved," Henderson said. "The assets have been distributed according to the settlement. Mrs. Perry, excuse me, Ms. Bennett. You are free to go." Lydia stood up. "Thank you, Judge." She walked out of the courtroom. The hallway wasn't empty. It was lined with reporters. But this time, Lydia didn't stop to give a quote. She didn't need to. Her actions had spoken louder than any soundbite. She walked out of the courthouse and down the steps to the waiting car. It wasn't a Maybach. It was a sensible, high-end electric sedan. As she got in, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Hayden. "Hayden, I hope you're happy. You took everything." Lydia looked at the message. She thought about blocking him, but that felt petty. Instead, she typed a reply. "Lydia, I didn't take anything, Hayden. I just took back what I made." She put the phone away. "Where to Ms. Bennett?" the driver asked. "The office?" Lydia said. "We have a bug in the API to fix." The car pulled away, merging into the traffic of the city she now owned a significant piece of. Back in the courthouse, the janitor was sweeping up the debris of the day. He found a discarded newspaper on a bench. The headline read, "The Silent Partner Speaks How Lydia Bennett Reclaimed Silicon Valley." Underneath there was a picture. It wasn't of Lydia in the boardroom. It wasn't of her in the beautiful white suit. It was an old, grainy photo from 2009. A barbecue. A young Hayden Perry was laughing, holding a beer, looking at the camera. But in the background, slightly out of focus, was Lydia. She was sitting at a patio table, hunched over a laptop, typing furiously. Nobody had noticed her back then. They only saw the man in the front. But the caption simply read, "The Architect." Lydia looked out the window of her car as the Perry Systems tower came into view. The giant C logo was still on top. She made a mental note to change that. Bennett Systems had a nice ring to it, or maybe just Lovelace. She smiled. She opened her laptop. She had work to do. And that is how Hayden Perry learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Never underestimate the person who knows your passwords. Lydia didn't just win a divorce case. She rewrote the source code of her own life. It brings a whole new meaning to the phrase, knowledge is power, doesn't it? If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, and digitally make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about karma betrayal and the underdogs taking over the world, smash that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a upload. What do you think? Did Hayden deserve to lose it all? Or was Lydia too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you in the next video, school.